Hi, you caught me bebopping to the intro. What a great and powerful intro. Hi, I'm Cherrilynn and your host, and welcome to Talking Stand Firm. We're going to get right into the program because we have a great guest, Jake. eh, Bring Jake on because Jake has a lot to talk about. Hi, Jake. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. I'm great. Hey, David, are we live?
Yeah, we are. We're live. I got us. I see us live.
Okay. Okay. Uh, it's not okay. I'm going with it. It's
Are
not
you
live on
looking
my
at?
end, so
Oh, yeah, it says live on my end. I'm alive. Are you, Jake?
okay. No, I'm still scheduled. So I totally messed up the program here, didn't I?
No, I don't think so. But we have a great program for you today. In fact, the next couple of weeks,
Oh
we just
wow.
have
Okay,
some
we're good.
great people. So, but Jake, so we can get our guest on, Daniel. Why don't you tell us a little bit about last night? Do a little recap, and don't forget those shout outs because I know people are wanting to hear their name on Talking Stand Firm.
Man, this is so crazy. So, the part that says we're live on here is not showing up on mine. So I'm totally was like, well, okay,
Well, let me
we're
check.
just
I'm
doing
going
this
to
for
check
fun. No, we're good. We're
Facebook.
good. We're live. We're live. So
Oh, yeah,
everyone,
great.
I apologize. Everybody's got together but me today. And this is very special program. We've got Daniel Secomb on.
Mm.
Uh, wow. Yeah. No, it's totally not. It's totally telling me we're not live, but I can see us live. So this is just totally
Just
weird.
don't look up. Don't look up
Yeah,
there.
don't
Just,
don't don't look up. What is
just,
wrong here? What is going
just.
on? So
So tell us
yeah,
about last night. I know our guest for next week, Doug Carter, said he was listening
yeah,
to it, and he's just. This is one question that a lot of people have.
yeah,
Where is the U.S. going to be? And you're talking about on thin ice. So, wrap up a little bit of what you talked about last night and give us some shout outs.
yeah. So if everyone's been following along as we teach each Thursday night, we're working through a progression of what were conferences I was doing in churches and places around the country. But because of COVID, we're doing this online now. And so they're 2-part sessions for the most part, working through a progression so we would begin with asking the question of just looking at the big picture of what's going to happen and the need to stand firm, the need to be spiritually prepared, and the need to
Mm-hmm.
be spiritual warriors, to be not just standing firm, but marching on. But then we
Mm-hmm.
also then looked at and asked the question, okay, if we got this big picture of the events that are going to occur and we're in this present age, how close are we to these events beginning? And we looked at some, what I believe is clear biblical evidence, which we've talked about on here as well. And then we talked about what I believe is the next thing to look at is the rise of the Antichrist and where he will come from. And when we did that, when we looked at that, we saw there's a lot of details about the alignment of nations at the end and where the
Mm-hmm.
Antichrist is going to come from. And it is completely center stage, the Middle East, with the
Mm-hmm.
center stage being Israel, being Jerusalem. But with that, that doesn't mean the rest of the world is not somewhere in the mix,
Right.
right? And so we wanted to back up because the biggest question, of course, those in the United States are asking is, what about the United States? What about, where do we
Mm.
fit in it? Or whatever, maybe nation you're in, where do you fit in? And so that was the question. So last night was meant to be, let's just ask the question, where is American Bible prophecy? Now, there's a lot of folks who will plug it in different places. And I made a statement. I said, someone will say there's an eagle here, so that must be the United States. And
Right.
I didn't say, hey, that's wrong, but it is. I mean, that's not just how it works, with that. When you have very clear statements saying it's something else, you can't just go plug in symbols but we did look at very clear passages. There's 3 clear passages that aren't 3 different options, but rather they're telling the same story of
Mm-hmm.
Western nations, which, then it's talking in Bible times, it's pointing to what we'd call Western Europe. But there is language there that seems to also point to extensions of that, and so I think the whole Western world could be included in that. And so again, so much of Bible prophecy talk and so much of what you see out there today, I mean, especially recently concerning the election, is focused on the events that are happening, and this must be the end because of
Mm.
this. when I believe the important focus is let's go in and dig in. What does Scripture say? And let's figure out from there. And so that's what we did last night. We asked the question, where is America in Bible prophecy? And we dove into that.
And so we're smack dab on the side, right? Are we going to be, you gave, last time you taught this, you gave three different places that we could be, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. There's 4 scenarios basically for the end of the age nations. You know, one, you're going to be united with the Antichrist. Another, you could be in resistance, and I want to come back to that. The other, you could basically be neutral, or you're out of the way before that happens. And so that's the 4 choices there are. One thing that we know is not going to happen. No one is going to be standing with Israel at the end of the age. So I mean, it is. We read within Scripture. I think it's Isaiah 66 where you read God says, "I will save you. It will be me, no one else." And so no one is standing with Israel. And so there are other nations that align with the Antichrist, and I think those are directly lands that he conquers, nations he conquers, or that a line that are joined, and then others around the world who will just hop on board. But the scenario that we read last night, so we read from Daniel 11 and Ezekiel 38 and 39, which talks about the phrases it uses is the ships of Kittim and the merchants of Tarshish, which point to a Western Navy, or Western naval resistance that comes against the Antichrist. And it says, so in Daniel 11, you've got the king of the north, which I believe is the Antichrist. There's other views out there, but the oldest and most, what we said, start with the text, the most plain reading is that he's the Antichrist, that he comes into conflict with the king of the south, which seems to be Egypt, and maybe an alliance with Egypt. This Western Navy comes against him and causes him to turn away from that battle with the South. But then it says he turns his attention against the people of the covenant, Israel. And then it's like the nations just say, okay, have at it. And then we pick up Ezekiel 38, where it talks about the merchants of Tarshish, talks about Sheba and Dedan, which are maybe Saudi Arabian Peninsula nations. But then these Western nations, and there it talks about them just being neutral and looking on. But I don't think there's 2 different, there's resistance nations and neutral nations. I think what we see here is a story that says there's going to be resistance and then being neutral, isolating away from it. And it seems to be coming up and defend other nations. But when the Antichrist turns against Israel, it's like, have at it, which sounds like you're just coming out straight of a committee out of the United Nations today. And so, I mean, that's that's the scenario that plays out. So that's it. I mean, that's the choices, and it's really depressing. I mean, it really sucks the air out of a place.
Oh, did you see this best trends? I'm 13 and I'm really interested in Bible prophecy. Is it possible to identify the Antichrist before he reveals himself? Great question. Jake, I'll let you answer that one.
That is a fabulous question. And to be interested at 13, that's incredible. And to be tuning in, thank you, Best Trends. Glad to have you on. I would say yes-ish. Yes-ish. So what we find over and over again is really the sign is the abomination of desolation, which is going to happen at the midpoint of that final 7 years. And so you have a figure who is leading a nation that has strengthened a covenant or made a covenant with Israel, bringing peace to Israel, and then sets himself up to be worshiped in relationship to the temple. And then once he does that, he turns against Israel. And Jesus, I mean, what he says, look, when you see this sign in Matthew 24, the abomination of desolation, you see it, and we see it also in 2 Thessalonians 2. We see it again in Daniel. That is the sign, and that's the revealing of the Antichrist. That's when it's like, okay, this is the guy for sure. So that point, yes. Before that, kind of. So because and that's what we're doing this is because there's so many different views of who the Antichrist will be. And again, Antichrist is, anyone who is against the Lord. But this one particular person who we've said is the Assyrian, and Micah and Isaiah, the king of the north, the man of lawlessness. The one phrase that we read, in I think it's Daniel 11, it says that he's the ruler who does as he pleases, and which I think is probably a really good statement of that. And so what seems to be is possibly Daniel 8 is laying out what's going to happen leading up to that. And if that's the case, again, Iran and Persia are going to, Persia in the past, Iran's going to rise up, spread out power in the Middle East, which possibly is happening right now. Turkey, which is Yavon biblically in Daniel 8, is going to come up against it. It says a prominent horn. So there's a leader that initiates this movement of Turkey, which is likely from Revelation 17, a revival of the Ottoman Empire, comes up against, defeats Iran, spreads out, and then something happens. He dies. The prominent horn is broke off, is what we have in Daniel 8. And then it seems to be a group of 10 nations, then 3, and then 1 from that. And so you can be looking for that. And if that's happening, I think it's very clear that's who that is. I think there's also going to be multiple figures that rise up as leaders in the Muslim world who are seen as the Islamic Messiah, who fits that bill in Matthew 24, false Christ. And so I think there is. I think if you're watching the Middle East and you're watching especially Turkey, I don't think Erdogan is the Antichrist, but he very likely could be that prominent horn in Daniel 8. If we're watching that, see how that goes, I think you can see someone rising in that. But the sign, so I think yes, but I think it's not... The amount of deception it talks about, it's going to be, I think, difficult.
Right. Matt Weimer says he is suddenly revealed when God appoints it so. However, the geographic location spoken by the prophets give ample info on where he will come from. Thank you, Matt. And that's
yes,
just kind
he
of
did that
said,
in
Jake.
10 minutes. Matt did that in less than 10 minutes, Matt. Come on the show. That is absolutely well done.
Gods of Thunder has been making some comments, and we're not avoiding you. Your comments are really good, and we want to say God bless you too. And the comment that you had before that, the warning for Christian brothers and sisters, it's so true. That's why we do what we do on Talking Stand Firm. That's why we try to get the best guests with the best and most relative information for our brothers and sisters. And if you're not saved and you're watching and you want to know this Jesus we're talking about, this Messiah that we worship, just email us and we will, Jake at standfirmministries.com. Easy as ABC, right, Jake? If God's calling you, acknowledge you're a sinner. B, believe that he is the Christ and he died for your sin. And C, cry out and confess. If you believe with your heart and say it with your mouth, you will be saved. If Jesus is calling you, this is why we do what we do.
Exactly.
And we're encouraging you to go out, not just to stand firm, but to go forth as well. Right, Jake?
Yeah, exactly right. And with these events, and I love what Sons of Thunder is pointing out, is that what happened in Europe, what has happened in America with the refugees from Islamic nations, the immigration that's, really just flooded, that we saw flooding Europe, and then also in America. It is so strange. If you look at America's interest, America's positive interest in Islam after 9/11 and how much it exploded, it's bizarre. It really is so bizarre. And so if there is this Antichrist is perceived to be the Messiah of the Islamic world, then we have his army, his plants here. The word I was looking for last night, David, right, was cells. That we've got groups all over. There's a show right now on Netflix, and I don't recommend it necessarily as for content, but I want to tell you, if you want to see what's happening in Europe and how that Islam is infiltrating, this is so it's depicting Islamic State a few years ago, ISIS. It's called Caliphate. I encourage you to check it out. It will just really open your eyes to what's going on and what we face in the West as the expansion, as this opens up in the Middle Eastern power. And so that's one of where we were coming from last night is, okay, so prophecies tells us these things are going to happen. There are going to be resistant Western nations, resistant at first, neutral, but not with Israel. And what we read in Ezekiel, I think Ezekiel 39, verse 5 and 6, we read that even the nations in these coastlands who feel safe, who are neutral, that judgment is going to come upon them because of their neutralness at that time. And so, but also looked at, if we know a Middle Eastern power is going to rise, then we know where we're at today. Something has to change in the United States. Now, it can be as small as just diminishing in our presence in the world, in our status as a world leader, just diminishing to some degree. But any diminishing, any rising of another power, because how the world is linked, is going to impact our way of life. And my concern is that, listen, I don't want my way of life to change, and I don't want some of the things we could face because of that. But the fear is not necessarily that. It's not trying to stop that. The purpose of this is to say, hey, if our way of life is going to change, then we need to be prepared, because that's going to impact our faith. It's going to be a challenge for our faith.
Jake, when Doug comes on next week, he's going to show us and inform us on how it will change and what the motives and the operandi, how it's going to change, what to look for in the world, and how not to be deceived. So please tune in next week as well. But stay with us now.
Yeah.
Gene has a good question.
So Erdogan isn't the little horn. Would that be a correct summation? I absolutely believe so. Now, again, it is so what we're saying is that Daniel 8 is all futuristic. Doesn't mean it was. So the traditional understanding of Daniel 8 as a prophecy is that the first 2/3 of it was historical and happened through Alexander the Great, and happened between his empire, the Macedonian Empire, and with Persia. But the last part of it has always been understood to be futuristic. Now, if you referring to the rise of the Antichrist, when we get to the little horn portion, when we get to the later portion of that. But if you read through the text, the whole thing is it says this will happen in the latter days. There's not a distinction made in the text. And so I believe, yes, it was historical, because this is what our guest, we're waiting for at any moment, Daniel Secomb, he says a lot of time pattern prophecy, that you have these patterns developing throughout throughout history, where you have these almost but not quite. And so I think that's what we had back then, but I think the whole thing's futuristic. So I want to set that, because I want to understand we are few who are saying this whole thing is futuristic. And so I think it's something that we need to say, this is possible, highly likely, but let's watch it. So if that's the case, yes, the little horn would not be Erdogan, because according to Daniel 8, there is going to be someone who leads Turkey in a revival of the Ottoman Empire to begin to expand, to defeat Iran, what was Persia, and get it started. But he's not going to be the one to eventually be the Antichrist. So the short answer that I should have led with is you're exactly right. He would not be the little horn, according to Daniel 8. And a very interesting aspect to the possibility, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, of the Antichrist, if he is perceived to be the Islamic Messiah, the Mahdi, there are many that hold, I think it's age 40. They have an age that many have said that he will be. And so Erdogan's already passed that. And I think, so within, and I was talking to a future guest we've got coming up in April, Bob Hunt with Zion's Hope. And we were talking yesterday at how it's really hard to, because he's really worked hard in looking at the sources of Islam to understand their eschatology. And one thing that he says, and I totally agree, it's so hard to just nail down because it's not a complete consistency throughout the teachings of Islam. But predominantly you see that age. And so I think, that's another thing that knocks Erdogan off.
So we have Best Trends has another question. I have another question. Who are the two witnesses? Is it going to be two literal people, or will it be a select from the two lampstands? Great question. These are very thoughtful questions.
Yeah, very question. Great Best Trends. I would tell you, I struggle understanding the two witnesses, the 144,000. I just really have not dove into it. I mean, if you followed us, I try to simplify it and hit the big events and not get into the weeds here. But if I had to say that the top three things that folks want to talk about with prophecy is number one, the rapture, number two, the mark of the beast, number three, the two witnesses. And every bit of schooling I've done, every book I've picked up, somebody wants to label them as, these people returning, the Elijah or Moses, which I think is, valid discussion there. But I think if we go just the plain reading of the text, these are two literal people. And I don't think there's anything within the text that would point to that not being two literal people that come on the scene and do that. And what it said that they do is nothing different than what we see in the Old Testament prophets. So this is not out of God's wheelhouse. This is not completely unusual. I mean, this is how God rolls. And so I think that's just saying basically, hey, we know this is going to be two literal people. Now there may be more to that, and also I think there is more to dive into with that. But yeah, I think two literal people.
Cool. So is Daniel eating his M&Ms yet?
Not yet. Not yet. He's coming. So
do you have a few shout outs?
We gotta be nice to him. So yeah, I do have a shout out. So we gotta be nice to Daniel. He got up early for us today.
4:00 in the morning. Is that what you're saying? He's in Australia, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
wow.
So it's so hard navigating different times, with different time zones. And so I originally shot him time saying Eastern time, but he knows I'm in Central time. And so we kind of got some wires crossed last night. We were working out. But man, he's in the green room looking all sharp at 4 a.m. Okay, let me give some shout outs before we do this. Soldiers in Christ, our producer here, David. If you've not caught his YouTube channel, go check it out. Soldiers in Christ. Jeannie, thank you for saying amen. Manera, I know I butchered your name. You've been so faithful to be on, and you said hopefully America will be a final bastion among the nations during the Antichrist reign. Of course, yeah, we would love that. It doesn't seem to point to that. Daryl Giles, thank you for the amazing emoji collection here. America time is fleeting and 100%. Right on. Cool. Great. Doug Carter, who's going to be our guest next week, said hello. JD Winiger, who has been so good to share our teachings. We thank you for that. And unfortunately, I know some of you catching this from Armageddon News. Armageddon News was banned last week. I think we were one of the last things to go out. We're not going to blame it on us, but was banned, which was 75,000 subscribers. Been going on for several years. And now, multiple timeouts that had happened before that. But I mean, and just for posting the truth, just saying the same thing that we're saying here. And so that's being rebuilt. Armageddon News 2, get on there and be watching. We're going to be having an email subscription list come out at Armageddon News just in case this happens again. If you're over on YouTube as well, we're glad you're here. But somebody caught there. We think Kristen Hudson, Eric Wise, good friends of mine. I'm glad you were on. Stephanie Harvey from Australia, always glad to have you on. And Sarah and Janine, it's great to have you on as well. And Hayes White says, thank you. That was really good message. We'll take that. Sons of Thunder laying out a lot of truth within the comments. We thank you for that.
Yes.
Dean Maiden said that the Antichrist and false prophet will be, and he points to the Mahdi and a return of a Muslim Jesus and figure. And absolutely, Dean, we agree with you 100%. And that's what we focused on so much. And so much of our conversation, we say the Middle East is the focus. Let's don't talk about the West.
Yes. Well,
But we're going to talk about the West for the next few weeks. And there is no one better to talk about politics of the last days and talking about the future than our good friend Daniel Secomb. And Daniel, we're so glad that you got up early and you came on board to join us. Daniel, I've been looking forward to this because we have been just hammering the last several weeks the aspect of a Mideast beast, a Middle Eastern empire, the Antichrist, and the possible role of Islamic eschatology. And I really stay out of the weeds of a lot of stuff within the West, but you have a teaching called Politics in the Last Days, which I encourage everybody. Hope we can get maybe the link up in the comments because it is the best at understanding what's going on. But I had a conversation with you about how politics right now that we're seeing in the West, how that could tie into Islam. You gave me an answer that just blew me away. And so that's why I wanted to pick your brain about that in front of everybody today. But Daniel, we're so glad that you're here. Let Cherrilynn introduce you and then we'll dive into it.
Yes, Daniel, we're so glad you're here. Daniel Secomb is a sought-after end-time speaker and dynamic itinerant Bible teacher. He ministers at churches and conferences throughout Australia and the United States. He is the founding director of Israel, Islam, and the End Times and Culture War Resources, two rapidly rising influential ministries that are educating and engaging societies on some of the most controversial and hotly debated topics of our time. Israel, Islam, and the End Times informs and educates Christians on the prominent role of Islam that Islam will play. So if you want to contact Daniel, how can they contact you? Because I love having you. I feel like you know more about the United States politics and what's going on than most Christians do, than most of our even politicians do.
Good question. My personal website needs to be updated, so probably not the best place to direct them there. But I think it's best to probably connect with me on. I've got two Facebook pages where I post a lot of content to, and that's Israel, Islam, and End Times Facebook page, and also the Culture War Resource Facebook page. And I post to the Israel, Islam, and End Times website as well. Although that's probably more of an aggregated news website where I'm updating people with what's going on in regard to Israel and within Islam and the Muslim world and eschatology. So probably the Facebook pages is probably the best place to get me. So.
Thanks. And I want to thank you so much. Yeah,
go ahead.
I just want to thank him for getting up so early. Thank you for getting up so early for us.
That's okay.
Good for that early.
Well, my theology doesn't really allow for God to be up at this time. So
Jake has some really powerful questions for you. So I guess he wants to wake up your brain real early.
Thank you.
Yeah. And some of you are catching us at Israel, Islam, and the End Times on Facebook. And so, Daniel, we appreciate the opportunity to shoot over there and just doing great work. We love you, Daniel. Love what you're doing. We miss that you can't be in the States. Hopefully, get you back soon. But what you're going to talk about, and we spoke of Armageddon News getting banned. Daniel stays in Facebook jail. And so we're fortunate to have him out. I mean, he's got a permanent seat. He's the Richard Wurmbrand of Facebook. So or the John Bunyan of Facebook. Let's go with that. But Daniel, I'm scared to get into just what's going on in the West because there's so much conspiracy stuff out there. But yet at the same, and I'm hearing pastors all the time to say, there's so much conspiracy, just don't listen to any of it. No, I mean, there is a really sinister aspect going on. You've got a grasp on it. And so I wanted to ask you, and I want, and a bit later, I want you to define some of this too. But I think you're on board as well that there's going to be a Mideast beast, and things point to that at the end. But before we get there, you've shared with me that you see the leftist side of politics, Marxism, all of that possibly leading up to this Sharia law and living with under an Islamic caliphate. I mean, could you help us wrap our minds around that possibility?
Yes. So basically, Islam has a tried and tested doctrine of jihad, and it's worked for them for the past 1400 years. Islam has dominated and subjugated nations, basically swallowed up nations and wiped its mouth with you thinking that it hasn't even been completely dominated by Islam for as long as its inception. So, for example, all of the northern countries, all the countries of northern Africa previously used to be Christian nations, but they were all gradually subjugated by Islam. And once Islam came in, they removed the laws, replaced the laws with Sharia. Everything completely changed, even down to the calendar. The calendar's changed. They were using a Gregorian calendar. Now they use a Muslim calendar. Everything changes. And that's the whole doctrine with Islam, that within Islam, they will not stop waging jihad, which is not just a jihad of the sword, but also it's jihad has many different aspects, but they will not stop until the nation falls to Islam. And they use every strategy under the sun. And the most effective strategy, and this actually was a bit of a, there was a change of tactic actually within Islam I'll just elaborate that for you. So in 609 AD, that's when Muhammad came into the scene, and they've basically been swallowing up nations ever since. Now, this continual jihad hasn't had a pause, and neither has Islam had a reformation, in which spreading Islam by violent force was replaced by spreading Islam by peaceful means. So it's been a continual ongoing. In fact, Muhammad made it very clear that war against the infidel nations will not stop, not until the end of the age. I'm going to read to you something from the Seerah. This is from Seerah 448. This is the Life of Muhammad by Sir William Muir. It says, after all the victories, some Muslims said that the days of fighting were over and even began to sell their arms. But Muhammad forbade this, saying, there shall not cease from the midst of my people a party engaged in fighting for the truth until the Antichrist appears. And it says that jihad was recognized as the normal state of affairs. And as I said, the Middle East, Northern Africa, and parts of Asia were all subjugated through military conquest. So Islam's initial tactic of military confrontation with the West came to a grinding halt at the gates of Vienna in 1683. Okay, so this is when their strategy of military conquest basically lasted until then. Now, had the Muslim armies prevailed, they stood to overrun all of Christian Europe, and the entire continent would have been part of the Muslim Ottoman Empire. So they knew that in order to conquer Europe and the West, Islam will need a change of tactic. And this is where the emergence of the Muslim Brotherhood came in under the leadership of Hassan al-Banna in 1922. So he would breathe new life into the ambitions of Islam and dominate the West. So acknowledging their ability to confront the West by military means they sort of change a strategy, which, look, in the long run has proved to be nothing but brilliant, and we're witnessing it today. So the Muslim Brotherhood laid out a plan of infiltrating the West from within, which what can be described as cultural jihad. So Muhammad Mahdi Akef, he was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, said, actually, sorry, I should say he was one of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. He said, I have complete faith that Islam will invade Europe and America because Islam has logic and a mission. The jihad will lead to smashing Western civilization and replacing it with Islam, which will dominate the world. So that, in a nutshell, illustrates to you the change of tactic that they needed to have a more subtle way of infiltrating the West. And by the way, Muhammad Mahdi Akef, not Muhammad Mahdi Akef, I should say, the Hassan al-Banna, I should say. When he founded the Muslim Brotherhood, he was basically borrowing the tactics of the communists. In fact, in particular, a Italian communist by the name of Antonio Gramsci, because Antonio Gramsci's strategy was to subvert the West as well. So Gramsci and Hassan al-Banna were around the same time. So they both came up with this idea that they could never confront the West militarily because the West is way too strong.
Right.
They would never have a chance. And so their best bet was to infiltrate the institutions. And here's the key. Their key was to use the West's civil liberties against them. They were going to use civil liberties to destroy the West's civil liberties. That was their strategy.
Wow. Wow.
So when you say civil liberties, what do you mean by that?
Okay, well, a classic example is freedom of speech. So, through freedom of speech, they will use speech to say whatever they want. And if people were going to say, hey, you shouldn't say that, that's inflammatory, they'll say, I'm just exercising my freedom of speech. So they will use their freedom of speech to say, to undermine the Western principles. And look, you see this with Ilhan Omar. I mean, that's a great example with what she's doing. Yeah. She's using freedom of speech to attack the West's foundations and to weaken the West's foundations and to and basically using the guise of a so-called minority group. Hey, listen, we're a minority group, they will say. They will use that position in which they will attack the freedoms that we have, our freedom to speak, freedom of speech. By the way, freedom of speech is probably the most important out of all our freedoms. Like we've got academic freedom, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, right? All these different freedoms that we all prize, but all these freedoms that we enjoy are at stake if we don't first have freedom of speech. Because it's through freedom of speech that we defend and protect all other freedoms. And that's the one that they're going after.
Yep.
Wow. So, I mean, we see that. I mean, that's happening. I love what you said. I mean, it's never ended. Though, I mean, you know, I would look back in history and say it seemed like it did, but you've said that was the shift to more of the cultural jihad rather than the actual physical warfare. Now, I mean, we definitely see that rising here in the United States and in the West, but still it would seem that it's more leftism that's really impacting politics and changing that and impacting believers. What's going on behind that, and how would, Islamists use that?
That's great. Well, that's a great example. In fact, I'll probably point to a very disturbing discovery made by federal investigators. In fact, and this was in 2002. So the FBI basically uncovered a document, an official document from the Muslim Brotherhood. And this was their strategic goals for North America. And it was their goals were chillingly outlined. This is from a meeting in 1991. And I'm going to read to you out a short excerpt, and it says this. It says, the process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, in other words, Arabic for Muslim Brotherhood, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within, sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers. So once again, their grassroots approach in slowly infiltrating Western society by undermining its institutions, its cultural centers of influence, using the West's liberal ideas, freedom of speech, tolerance, inclusivity, diversity against itself. And 2 decades later, their success has just been absolutely, unprecedented. Unprecedented.
Wow, definitely chilling. And no, which we didn't talk about this ahead of time, so I may be throwing you under the bus on this. But I mean, didn't we see within Hitler, within Nazi Germany, a connection to the Ottoman Empire? I mean, wasn't it some alignment there in the past?
100%. Yeah. Yes, 100%. And his name was Hassan Al-Mini. Hassan Husseini Armeni, I think his name was. In fact, Hitler met with him there's one famous occasion where there is actually a photo where he is actually Husseini is actually sitting down with Hitler. He was the Mufti of Jerusalem. Jerusalem. In fact, when he went there to Germany to meet with Hitler, there's even a photo of him inspecting the Nazi troops. So he was walking down, all the troops are in a line, and he's going down and inspecting the troops, etc., etc. You can Google all these images. It's really extraordinary, but it's also it almost seems to be airbrushed from history. Like people,
Yes.
they don't want to talk about this. The left don't want to talk about this, especially.
Yeah,
no one talks about
this. I totally butchered history there. World War I would be where they were aligned, but still that connection with Nazi Germany. So let's back up and help you. You teach a lot. I mean, you've got your
if I could even say, like, even in World War I, the Ottoman Empire was aligned with Germany as well.
Yeah.
So even going back to that as well. So and look, as being an Aussie, I also take a little bit of pride in the fact that it was Aussies that liberated Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire. So so that kind of, I feel a little bit chuffed by that, if you understand that word.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for doing that. We'll acknowledge it now.
That's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you talk a lot in cultural resources about what's going on in politics and stuff. I mean, what are we seeing in America with what is leftism? I mean, what is Marxism? And I have a video queued up from your video for Politics in the Last Days. Do you want me to show that? You might of where you talk about the spectrum of politics.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, let's see if I can get that up. Maybe. Where's the right button? So I tell you, it's telling me we're not even on the air on my screen, so I'm kind of flying blind on some things. But here we go.
Or I could show it.
I've got it queued.
I could show it. Okay.
Well, maybe not. Okay.
That's what going live is all about.
On the far left, you have 100% government, and on the far right, zero government. Anarchy is no government and doesn't make sense at all. On the far left, you have socialism, communism, and Nazism. All systems that have a socialist form of government with only slight variances between them. Traditionally, Republicans were slightly to the right of center, and Democrats were slightly to the left. In recent years, though, through the radical influence of the media, Hollywood, and the multitude of Marxist professors in our university, both parties have slid to the left. With the Democrats going so far, they have openly joined hand in hand with the radicals. That's why they all work together. All on the left now have the same goal, a socialist America.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And this is not just America alone. We're seeing this played out in Australia as well.
Two places at once. I love it.
Yeah, that was, I mean, such a powerful video when I first heard that.
Yeah, it's socialism. That's what the Democrats want. That's what they want this country to go toward. And they have a lot of powerful countries helping them, that behind them, trying to help them get us there.
Yep. So I guess the best way for me to explain Marxism and what that is to refer to an American economist by the name of Henry Hazlitt. So Henry Hazlitt is a guy. So basically, he said this. He said the whole gospel of Karl Marx can be summed up in a single sentence. He says, and look, when I say this, just to look what's going on all around you, right? So he says this: the whole gospel of Karl Marx can be summed up in a single sentence. Hate the man who is better off than you are. Never under any circumstances admit that his own success may be due to his own efforts, to the productive contribution that he has made to the whole community. Always attribute his success to the exploitation, the cheating, and the more or less open robbery of others. So that is basically a summation, a very good one actually, of communism. And it's the fact that communism, or I should say Marxism, Marxism is the political philosophy behind communism.
Yeah.
So Marxism is really an ideology that reflects a poisoned heart. It is the ideology of a ungrateful, angry, poisoned heart, and it's really the opposite of the American attitude, where there is a patriotism, there is a grateful thankfulness for the fact that you live in such a free country and you're so blessed by that. That's why you celebrate Thanksgiving every year, where Marxism is the opposite of that. It is a spiteful, ungrateful, angry spirit, and when people come under this, it completely changes them. It destroys. Not only does it destroy people, but once it takes a hold of a nation, it destroys the entire nation. Destroys a nation. In fact, the thing is that people need to understand that more people have died in the 20th century than all other centuries combined. People don't realize that. But more people have died in the 20th century than all other centuries combined. Now, I remember watching a hero of mine. I just love him. His name's Victor Davis Hanson. And he actually was asked a question and said, well, why is that significant? And what was the reason why more people died in the 20th century than all other centuries? And he came up with one word, and he said ideology. Ideology. And he says, and really, what is ideology? Well, ideology is the opposite of self-evident truth, right? So when a society lives by self-evident truth, and by the way, this is exactly what your Declaration of Independence is all about. What did Jefferson say? He said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident. Yes. Yeah, we hold these truths to be self-evident. In other words, that they're right and wrong are objective. Good and evil are objective moral values that, no matter what your opinion is, good will be good and evil will always be evil. Yet ideology completely, and all this comes in, and the first step to this is always remove God. You have to remove the Christian God. So the moment you remove the Christian God, then you can play God. You can play God. And when you play God, then you can decide what's right and what's wrong. You can decide what's good and what's evil. Then you are calling the shots in society. And listen, this has a drunkening effect. Societies become drunk with madness once they see themselves as God. And boy, haven't you already seen this? What's going on? I mean, look what's going on in the news cycle at the moment. You know, that they're trying to say, get rid of Mr. from Mr. Potato Head. Right?
Yes.
I know.
The degendering of our society. And our society is going completely bonkers. It has completely lost its mind. Because why? Because it has completely removed God from the situation. This can be summed up by the Christian thinker G.K. Chesterton, who said that when man ceases to believe in God, it's not that he then believes in nothing. It's then that he's capable of believing anything.
Yeah.
And this is what we're seeing.
And that's the really the segue of where leftism, Marxism takes us into accepting Islam and Sharia law, right? I mean, if you remove anything, yeah,
and really a lot of that comes out of the whole thing with Islam. See, the thing is with Islam and the left, they see themselves as allies. Now, when you look at on leftism and Islam on the surface, they seem like polar opposites. You would think that they would be at eternal war with each other, because the left embraces homosexuality and the whole LGBT. And what does Islam do? Well, they execute homosexuals, you know, and but it's not just that. There's a whole range of different things which you would think that on the surface that they disagree and they will be at war. But here's the thing: they both have a common enemy. They both want to destroy the Christian foundation of the West, in particularly America. And the Christian foundation is where America gets her strength. It's where America gets her liberty from. It's where America gets her liberty from. And look, it's a spiritual principle as well. Now, the Lord is that spirit, and where the spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And Jesus said, when you Jesus said that when you know the truth will set you free. All these principles, freedom is inextricably linked with Christianity. And when a nation is founded on Christianity, they get to enjoy the freedoms that all come as a result of that. But what happens is that with all these great freedoms comes the great freedom to pursue sin. And the greater the freedom, the greater the ability for a nation to pursue sin. And this is what happens, because with the greater ability to pursue sin comes the greater judgment. The more extreme sin that a nation pursues, the more extreme judgment. But here's the other thing: because America was in a position to pursue sin with so much, because it had the freedom to pursue sin. And I'm trying to think of the philosopher who said this. I think it was Vishal Mangalwadi. And he said that because of that, here's the thing. Look at America's foundation. Why do they have so much freedom? It's because of Christianity. Now, because their foundation is based on Christianity, there is no excuse. There is no excuse. And there is a principle that you see over and over within the Word of God, that when a nation, or even with an individual, when they know truth and yet they turn away from the truth, there is a greater judgment as a result of that. Remember what Jesus said to the surrounding towns around Galilee. He said, basically, he was condemning Capernaum, and he was condemning Chorazim. He said, if he said Sodom and Gomorrah, I mean, you know the story. He said they would have rejoiced at seeing my day. But look, I've got 5 o'clock in the morning brain, so I'm struggling with the scriptures.
Hey, you're
No,
doing great.
No, I mean,
You're
this
doing
is
great,
incredible.
Daniel.
And Daniel,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
getting close to the end of our time here, but I wanted you to connect something for me because, again, as Cherrilynn said, you know more about America than we do living here, which is just phenomenal. And God has really got his hand on you in understanding these things. But when I hear leftism, when I hear liberal, I think this is probably the typical evangelical mindset. I think, okay, they're
He's been cut off. They won't let him speak.
Yeah.
They cut him off. See, I'm joking.
I'm here. Can you see me?
I can't hear him. Jake, I can't hear Jake, but I think he wants to. He has. I get a copy of all of his questions, and now he's not even there. Daniel, we only have a few minutes left. What do you want to tell Christian Americans as far as what's going on in our country? I know I want to shake them and say, wake up. Don't be, tempted or misinformed. What do you want to tell us as our brother in Christ?
Okay, so listen, there's a whole backstory that I could go. Here he is. He's back. There's a whole backstory that I could go into in regard to understanding why America is in the position that she is now.
Please do. But we're going to go over. We're going to go over time because we what you have to say to us is so important. So if you go over time, we don't care.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, if I could just kind of briefly give you a brief history, because you need to understand history in order to understand where you're going and to understand the end goal. So, look, all this goes back to World War II in Germany, I should say. Gee, that's a country that comes up often. But there was a philosophical school based in Goethe University by the name, and basically famously became known as just as the Frankfurt School. And this was a bunch of academics that it was the only school focused on Marxism, that specialized in Marxism, I should say, in particularly critical theory. So this was founded by two individuals, Felix Will and another Hungarian communist called Gorgi Lukács. They founded the school. It was headed up by a man called Max Horkheimer. There was a bunch of academics called Erich Fromm, Theodor Adorno, and of course the most famous one of them all was a man called Herbert Marcuse. Now, when Hitler began to persecute the Jews throughout Germany, these academics had to flee. In fact, they filed for academic asylum. Of all places, they filed for academic asylum in America. So they fled to America. Now, Columbia University accepted their asylum, and Columbia University gave them tenured positions within their university. And this is where they began to take their Marxist philosophy, their critical theory, and they began to promulgate that not just in Columbia University, but Marcuse left there and he went to Brandeis. He went to Brown, and he eventually ended up in San Diego University. So the poison began to spread. And I'm summarizing this and trying to get this. So basically, here's the thing: what happened? Marcuse wrote a book called Eros and Civilization. So he actually put that man is not truly liberated until he is sexually liberated. Man is not liberated until he is sexually liberated. And so what he did, he got with a lot of these people who became central figures to the counterculture movement in the 1960s. So Martha Davis and a bunch of the other artists that, in fact, a bunch of them had a lot to do with Woodstock, I should say,
I
which
was
is
going to
interesting.
say.
Yeah, so a lot of these artists had a lot to do with Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse, I would say, is the father of the sexual revolution. The father of the sexual revolution. He was a man who came up with the term "make love, not war." Make love, not war. This was all deliberate, including the phrase, "If it feels good, do it."
Do it.
So he was the one who lit the flame to the prairie fire of the sexual revolution that swept across America in the 1960s and the 1970s and across the entire world. Because if America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, and
Yes.
even here in Australia. So it was from out of that where the whole philosophy of Antonio Gramsci of infiltrating the West from within. I mean, he's known as a phrase called the long march through the institutions. The long march through the institutions, and Marcuse was the one who built upon that. And then comes along. Oh gosh, please don't flee from me, 5 o'clock brain. I'm just trying to think of his name, but then there came along the 12 Rules for Radicals. Anyway, I've just got a bit of a mind blank. It'll come to me in a second. But anyway, this particular individual, this particular individual came up with a whole radicals. Oh gosh, what's his name? I can't believe it. Oh, it's Saul Alinsky, of course.
Saul Alinsky. I just looked it up for you.
Thank you. It's incredible, the things that flee from your brain at this time in the morning. Out of all the things I miss my mind the most. Anyway, so
I'm there with you, brother.
Saul Alinsky was the one. He wrote the manual, which became the Bible for the left. It became the Bible for the radical leftist insurgents within America, the activists. And it was the 12 Rules for Radical. In fact, Hillary Clinton, she wrote her thesis on Saul Alinsky. In fact, she exchanged with letters and things like that with Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky was a hardcore socialist. He was a radical. He sure was a radical, hence why he wrote the book 12 Rules. And in fact, when you read the book, it's incredible because the opening epitaph says I dedicate this book to the ultimate radical of them all, and that is Lucifer.
Yes.
Lucifer.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So go ahead.
So I dropped out, but you picked up where I was going, is because I think within the evangelical mindset, we just see these moral issues and we don't see the ideology behind it. And so what you're telling us here is the ideology behind what we're seeing from the left. It's not just moral. It's not just, against Christianity, but it has its roots in Marxism. And as you told us already, that Marxism and those ideologies of the past century has led it to be the bloodiest and most people killed. And it came from those ideologies. Get that word out. And I don't have an excuse of the early brain. So, that should shock us. And to me, when, making that connection, it's not a battle necessarily just on the moral front, though it is. It's not just, controlling Hollywood. It is a battle for just the foundational philosophies that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And as we sway left and we sway towards Marxism, then we're opening the door that just allows the floodgate of Islam and eventually Sharia law to come in. And we're seeing that. And it's happening, especially, in Europe. And I don't know where Australia is in far of the Islam influence, but y'all are ahead of us in terms of this movement left. And and really all of Europe is. So, we know we can look and see where we're headed.
Yes. Yeah, there was a bunch of activists in Yale University. It was university students from Yale who were saying that the Constitution needs to be abolished. No, and their words was the Constitution needs to be cancelled. And they were rallying on campus to cancel the US Constitution because, according to them, it's racist. It's you know what they say.
Yeah.
But that's what they were saying, and it doesn't surprise us. It does not surprise you. Why? Well, what did John Adams say? Your founding father, John Adams, said. He said, because we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. And then he said the most famous quote. He said, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So this is why the left is at war with your Constitution. They want to destroy it. And if they destroy it, they remove the First Amendment. And look, they're already going to try and do that with the so-called Equality Act.
It was passed yesterday, wasn't it?
Passed by the House, but hopefully the Senate. Look, and this is why the Georgia runoffs was so crucial to the left, because they now are in a position where they can pass the Equality Act, which would basically destroy your First Amendment. Basically destroy your First Amendment. You will lose your freedom of conscience. You will not be able to say, well, listen, I can't say that. I can't do that. I can't promote that because it goes against my conscience. No, all that will be completely removed. It's going to destroy the First Amendment. And this is why the left are against every single one of your amendments. Okay. The left hate your Constitution. They want to destroy it because they want to usher in the dictatorship of the proletariat, where
so
they
I
are
have
the ones who are in
a question. I have a quick question before we have to end. So if they're going to destroy our conscience, what about the military? It's like people don't join the military because they don't feel like they want to kill. It's against their religion. It's against their, I mean, it can go over into that. Correct?
Yeah, well, just look at just look at what's happened in the aftermath of Biden's so-called election win. But look what's happened in Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., the fact that it's still covered with razor wire, there's still thousands of troops there. And it's really quite disturbing what's going on. And I think it's interesting because I want to read to you a quote by George Orwell, and he said this. He said, all tyrannies rule through fraud and force, but once fraud is exposed, they must rely exclusively on force. And so you're going to see the left using the military to maintain their stranglehold on power. And this is why people are asking, well, why? And this is why the new Secretary of State was purging the military, going through the military, and he was trying to root out all these hardcore patriots. Right? Yep. All the 3%ers, the people. Yep.
Be honest, I wanted to puke because I'm former. I did my 20 years in the military, and everything that the leftists want to do with the military, it's scary. We're not going to have a military that's going to protect us if they keep doing this. But anyway, Jake, did you have another question before? I mean, we could go on and on, and I know we're going to have you come back on. We have to have you come back on.
We're definitely going to have you back, Daniel, and we've got the link up there to your message, Politics in the Last Days of the Last Days. I encourage people to click on that, watch it. Phenomenal. So Daniel, you basically told us we're in a mess, and the mess seems to be continued to, is on a trajectory that it could continue into this, to walk right into the mess related to the Antichrist. So, I mean, what us in America, who, I just presented last night At best, we're peripheral at the end in a diminished role. We're not standing with Israel. In best case scenario, really, depressed everyone. And then you added to it saying we're in a mess. So what do we do? I mean, what do we do now?
Okay, well, Americans need to understand that there is a special emphasis placed on America by the enemy. The enemy has singled out America. I mean, why is the rest of the world, including myself, focused on America? Why aren't I focused on the politics of Jamaica or the politics of Japan? Or right? Because America basically is the global policeman. It is in the position where it, I guess, the best way to say it is a Latin phrase called Pax Americana. Pax Americana, or it's American peace. America holds the balance of global peace. Goes back to another term originally called Pax Romana, when the Roman Empire held the balance of peace. But now America is in this position, and because, again, this goes back to its Christian influence. Its Christian influence was what made it powerful. God was the one behind the success of America. Hence why Alexis de Tocqueville wrote all this in his book Democracy in America. So because of this, the enemy knows that if it can bring America down, it has the rest of the world at its mercy. This is exactly what Ronald Reagan said. He says, if we lose our freedom here, there is no other place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And Reagan is 100% correct. He is 100% correct. If you guys lose your freedoms, then the evil one will then have free reign to do what he wants. Now, who was his number one target? We know that. His target is to destroy Israel. And we know that from reading the
Israel.
Bible. Yeah. Yep. We know that from reading the Bible.
We're friends with Israel right now. We are a powerhouse and we can help them, and we're friends with them now, but that's definitely going to change. I wholeheartedly believe with this new administration.
Yep, that will absolutely change. In fact, I think Biden took something like 20-something days before he even made a phone call to Netanyahu. So it's really quite clear that that America is going to shift its change. And by the way, this is all set up in the Bible. I mean, in Jeremiah 30, God says to Israel, "Where are your allies? They are no more." So this is where we are heading. This is the direction that we are heading in. We need to remind ourselves that when things seem like they're falling apart, things are actually falling into place. And we need to remind ourselves constantly by that. But again, America has to be brought down. I know I hate saying that because I love America, but this is just the way that it has to go. I want to read you something very interesting by Daniel Webster. Right? Daniel Webster, again, is one of your founding fathers. He said this: "Hold on, my friends, to the Constitution and to the Republic for which it stands." He says, "Miracles do not cluster, and what has happened once in 6,000 years, referring to the American Republic, may not ever happen again. Hold on to the Constitution, for if the American Constitution should fail, there will be anarchy throughout the world." Wow.
Woo,
incredible.
Chills on that one.
Daniel, that was... Please go.
Karl Marx also said something very, very similar. Karl Marx also said something very similar. Now, Karl Marx is not inspired. He's not a prophet, but he does have incredible insight. Karl Marx said, "Wipe North America from the map of the world and you will have anarchy, the complete decay of modern commerce and civilization." So, yeah, interesting.
Just thank you so much, Daniel. We want to have you on again and again and again and again. We just love having you. We'll try to make it a time so you don't have to get up so early.
Hey, can I throw a bomb in this real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
We probably ought to pre-record this and help you out a bit. But we really want to keep on the schedule because we got some folks who are being so faithful.
Yes,
being
thank
with us.
you, everybody.
But Daniel, I'm going to give you just a short answer. I'm going to throw a grenade in this, and maybe we can pick this up later. What you just said, the Daniel Webster statement, the Karl Marx statement, reminded me of something within 2 Thessalonians, and maybe even a bit of Daniel 12. But 2 Thessalonians talks about a restrainer being lifted.
Mm.
Could any of that be correlated?
Uh,
I told you
Jake,
I'm throwing a
just
grenade in
touched
this. Yeah.
you just touched
And you
on
don't have to
something
you don't have to answer. But I just wanted to throw this, get that in the discussion for our people thinking at home.
Yes.
I just want to say, well, thank you for bringing that up, because I think there is a lot to that you could possibly chew on. Let me tell you something that's interesting. You know, in fact, while I'm talking to you, I'm finding another link to another talk I did on the prophecy of politics of the last days, which I think will be better than the old one I did. So I'll just give this to you here. So what I do want to say, where can I post this to you? Comments. Can I comment? There we go.
Yeah, you can post it to the comments, and Dave can
I can't.
post it to the other sites, right, Dave?
Right, I'm going to send
Dave
it
is
to
our
Jake.
Dave
I'm going
is our
to
tech guru.
send it to you.
Yeah, I got it.
I just sent it.
In.
You got it? Okay.
If getting it.
Right, now, what you just said, Jake, was very, very important. Now, you know what the early church believed the restrainer was? A lot of people don't realize this, but the early church believed that the restrainer was the dissolution of the Roman Empire. That's what they believed. They believed that the Rome, because let's be honest, they thought that they were living in the last days, and they thought that if the Roman Empire was going to collapse, that would be anarchy, and that would usher in the Antichrist, and that would be the trigger that would be the last days. But you could see what was in their mind. The early church never thought that the restrainer in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 was the Holy Spirit. They never thought that. Never entered their mind. That only came in, the prospect of the restrainer being the Holy Spirit came along with the whole dispensational teaching, the whole Darbyism, with the whole pre-trib rapture. But no, so Jake, I tend to agree with you. I tend to think that it could be. I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying that if America capitulates, it could be the restrainer. It could be the 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And this is why I'm not dogmatic about any of this. I mean, I always have a wait and see approach, but I think it is a strong contender.
Yeah, and my position on that is we can just simply take the text for what it is. Something's restraining something, and when it's gone, evil's gonna be full blown. And I think that's fine. I think you know enough if you stop at that. But I think when people hear what we just said, they're saying, yeah, America's going to be raptured out, so the restrainer's gone. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying God using maybe the United States, maybe it's, are using something here to restrain. And I feel like we saw restraint in 1944, 45, World War II. People will look at what happened in World War II and Hitler, and they can say, man, that almost sounds like what's going to happen with the Antichrist. That's almost the end of the age. But it wasn't quite there because it was restrained. And we know God used America, used the Western nations to do that. Whether that's the answer or not, I think it's just interesting. And that was unprepared. That was a grenade that wasn't meant to go off. But the fact of that those statements just ring out that passage in 2 Thessalonians. Daniel, thank you so much for being here. We love you. Love what you're doing. Everybody,
join us next week. Doug Carter will be on. He'll be talking about what's going on with the New World Order, what's behind it, and why Christians need to know that, and the Great Reset. Tune in. You will be blown away. Just like I think Daniel and Doug need to have a conversation. I think you two could talk forever because you guys are on the same page. Thank you, Daniel. God bless everybody. Thank you for being with us. Bye now.